Hi there. Welcome to another exciting episode. This is our fifth episode of Pulling Weeds. I'm your co-host, Michael. Many of you know me as Ozark Nation. And then our other co-host, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, how are you doing
Hey
this
guys,
week?
good guys, good to be back with you. Yeah, weather's finally starting to change and getting some warm days and not so cool nights here in Sacramento. so
I believe it.
yeah, it's all good. But yeah, I mean, shit, a lot going on in the world these days, lots to talk about. So um, be
Yeah, there
interested to
is.
see where you want to start this week.
I always like to hear kind of what you got going on in the garden first. Kind of talk about that kind of stuff, what we each got going on. It's getting
Yeah,
hot here too. It's getting real hot. It's been in the mid 80s, but it cools off enough at night that the AC doesn't run, and you wake up sweating. That real fun sleeping time. Wish I had a good attic fan or something, but I don't. Um,
yeah. Not quite that warm here, but it's definitely on the horizon. I've been funny story. So I went outside to do some weeding, as one does, to clean up the garden space for the late spring, summer planting. And somebody went in my backyard and stole my two shovels.
that's weird.
So yeah, I've had somebody siphon gas at 7:30 at night, and my roommate caught in the act because we have video cameras out front. And then I've had my car get run into in my driveway by people losing control doing sideshows and the donuts in the intersection on the corner by our house. And now I've had somebody
Yeah.
go in my backyard and steal my shovels. So um, yeah, that's a little bit disconcerting to say the least. I'm not going to enjoy going to buy another fucking shovel, but
No, they're not cheap anymore.
they're not cheap, and you don't want to buy a shitty one. So, pardon my French, but yeah. So I realized that this week while I was doing some planting, and had a friend give me some sweet potato starts and some dahlias, which is super cool. I'm really into dahlias, and I'm excited about planting some of those. Got some garlic and onions planted, which I'm going to try to do better with this season. Um, Got a few tomato plants. We'll see how they do. That hasn't been my most successful crop. Um,
Yeah.
I picked some heirloom popcorn from the ears that I grew last year that I've been curing. I made
Nice.
yesterday, and then I picked out like certain kernels, like certain colors and stuff that I'm going to plant. Planted some hot pepper seeds, which I'm a little late on, but some people are going to give me some starts, so that's cool. What else? I put some dragon tongue beans in the ground, which I really love. They're kind of like yellow with purple stripes. I describe as a bit tapestry
That's cool.
colored. But yeah, they're really beautiful to have like on your farmer's market stand. I always recommend to my friends, like, dude, you should just grow these just to get people to come to your stand and look at stuff. But I
Is
also
that
really
the hard bean, or is that like the pod looks like that?
The pod looks like that. It's like
Gotcha.
light green, yellowish, and then it's got these like purple kind of stripes down it.
Cool.
And they're really amazing to eat fresh. So I really recommend them in your garden because they're a nice snack while you're out there just like cruising around working.
That's why they never sent me to pick green beans. I'd eat them all raw. I just
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. That's my thing. So yeah, I mean, I need to get some melons planted. I'd like to get some more corn planted, but it's a little bit later year here, so it's fine.
yeah.
Sweet potato start I'm excited about that my friend gave me, and I put definitely a bunch of heirloom potatoes in the ground. So I like to do my potatoes in like 25 to 45 gallon smart pots. I find that
Nice.
harvesting them is a lot easier, and then also like the ground is really clay where I'm at, so potatoes don't dig deep that well in that soil. So I've just found that they do a lot better when I do them in smart pots. Takes a little bit more
Yeah.
water, but it kind of like curates the ground underneath of them throughout the year, and then that ground's like plantable the following year.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. We got to grow some potatoes. We eat too much potatoes to not be growing them.
yeah, they're not. I mean, they're really nice to use with your old like indoor growing soil too. I would recommend, because they'll just like you don't have to fertilize them at all, and they're just pretty easy. I just would say put them
Yeah.
in the shade a little bit, or like kind of hide them out a little bit in the sun where you are. But yeah, I've had really good luck growing potatoes. I think I grew like 60 pounds last year, and I wound up giving a bunch away. So
That's
between
awesome.
those and the corn and the hot peppers, those were my best crops last year, and that was only my second year in Sacramento, so I'm kind of learning the heat here, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. That heat here, I don't know if I've even learned it yet, but it comes on quick. You know, we don't have much of a spring. We've already got flowers on our tomatoes and some melons starting to grow on some of our cantaloupe plants. It just goes so fast.
So
We've got all my tobacco and my peppers that I need to get in the ground, but they're ready to go. And some more watermelon plants. And then we got to start more of our sunflower seeds for the mammoths so that we have a nice supply of sunflower seeds through the winter. And then also got to start some corn plants for sure. And then I got to look at the potatoes.
If you want any of the heirloom popping corn seeds, let me know. I still have like 30 years that I chopped, and they're all multicolored. So,
Yeah, I'd love some.
It's probably like 10 sessions of real popcorn, but now that my company's doing butter, and I have the ghee too. I made some popcorn yesterday, and it was just ridiculous.
Oh yeah, that's all we do is make popcorn on the stovetop, like 5 gallons of popcorn at a time. It's I just call my kids my little corn monkeys. But yeah, we have an old like Dutch butter organic heirloom popcorn seed is what we have. So I'll send you some of that if you want. And it pops more into like the big fat yellow kernels.
Nice. Yeah, I'll grow it. I mean, the ones that I've been growing, they don't pop big kernels, but they're super flavorful. So
yeah.
And they do a lot
of good
popped ones, which I really like. They're probably not great for my teeth, but I really like
them. Heck yeah. And then all our ginger's up, so we're pretty stoked on that. The turmeric's kind of going a little slow, but it's really cool watching the ginger grow.
Yeah,
and we have and we have some real nice rows of sunflowers, like just bulk cut sunflowers that we planted, and then other just plain cut flowers. But they're all coming up really nice. Just probably a couple more weeks and they'll start having some blooms. So we're really stoked on that.
That's cool. Sunflowers are great. I really like taking the poles of the sunflowers after you're harvesting them and then like sticking them in the compost pile. And that's how I like to aerate my compost, and it keeps me from really having to turn it. Just like sticking the stem in there and then just like turning it a little bit and then just like aerating the compost pile that way and doing like 6 or 8 or however many you have in there. Like corn works too well, but sunflowers are the best.
That'll be awesome because with the cut sunflowers, we're probably going to have, I bet there's probably at least 300 or 400 plants out there. And then when we plant the mammoth sunflowers, we'll probably have a solid 150 to 200 plants. So we can have some serious amounts of sunflower seeds. But that'll be a lot of stalks because those mammoths, that's a nice 10-foot stalk.
Yeah, totally. Those are good at Jadam too because apparently they're an amazing potassium source.
Yeah, as well as I believe it's potassium. You can also like char them and then ferment them down.
When I first started growing in like the late 90s, I believe it was, I forget the name of that company, Down to Earth was doing a sunflower ash fertilizer that was like, I think it was like a 0035 or something they were advertising at the time.
Yeah.
The first couple of years I was growing, it was available. And then when I really started growing, it wasn't available anymore. And I was like, where the fuck did this go? We ran out of sunflowers,
Yeah. Well, I think probably also they might have ran out of clean sunflowers. I mean, growing up in Kansas, you live out there. Most of the big sunflower fields that people plant, it's all, crap sunflower seed. I don't know where the seed exactly comes from, but you can definitely tell they're spraying. So, Down to Earth might be making some money selling products and stuff. I always liked them, but maybe they just couldn't get a good amount of clean sunflowers anymore to continue to make that product available. Who knows?
Yeah, they're kind of like the organic company that's in a lot of hardware stores right next to the Roundup. So I don't know if I really like swear by them. I mean, I'll buy their stuff if it's like really necessary, but I think I bought a product like once in the last like 5 years.
I think they're the perfect place to start when you're like getting people off of things. It's like, hey man, because like you said, it's pretty easy to find them, and I think a lot of their products are pretty decent. I can't speak for all of it, but I definitely used some of it back when I was in Kansas City when it was hard to find some stuff at some one point. So
Yeah. Yeah, they're not a bad company for sure. They're trying, but it's hard to mass produce anything these days. If you want quality, it's like once you start getting into it, you start realizing you need to do it yourself. And I had a
exactly.
really good talk with a friend of mine this week that I'm excited about working with. That eventually I'd love to have him on the podcast. Really knowledgeable kid, and he does fermented hot sauce. I was telling you about him, and he quickly became one of my favorite farmers of the markets that I do because I could see he was very like grassroots in his process. His IG is Raised Roots. If anyone wants to look him up, an amazing hot sauce, and he does all of his stuff with like single strands of peppers. Like all his hot sauce will be like, oh, this is the Marconi pepper, or this is the green jalapeno that's not spicy, or he does a habanero one that's not a spicy one, and then he does some scorpions and some other stuff that's just crazy spicy. But when I first started talking to him, he was like telling me how he did a lot of things by hand, and I just thought that's like so rare because I remember walking around the Ferry Building in San Francisco, where was the first farmers market that I really got to know, and saw them with like heirloom growers and people that really seemed like they were doing it right on a level that I didn't quite understand yet. And I walked around one day and I asked all the farmers that I looked up to, I was like, hey, can I ask you a question? Do you guys use tractors? And every single one of them said yes. And that was before the title regenerative, but that was like when I started to learn about the whole no-till thing. And, that was before really like corporate monocropping of cannabis. And, I think a lot of people back then, like there was people that did, half acre or an acre up in Humboldt or Mendocino or whatever, but none of them were really using like heavy equipment to do their stuff. And it was pre the hemp movement. But I remember like, really thinking like, oh, does anybody grow vegetables without a tractor? And it turned out that like all these craft heirloom farmers, none of them did. They all used tractors. And I remember this is probably, 15, 18. And I was really kind of disheartened by that. Since then, I've found like a few small farmers that do things that aren't necessarily regenerative, but they are in their essence, but they're not doing it like vacation. They're just doing it like because they believe in doing it by hand, the same way that like some chefs believe in, milling flour by hand nowadays for higher quality. But yeah, I'm excited. So we're talking about working together and doing some stuff on his farm. He wants to do award-winning hot sauce. He already really does, but he wants to like set himself above and beyond. And I was talking to him about how some Jadam and K&F practices really tend to improve the flavonoids and the different metabolites of the plant. And because I think we both definitely have seen that in cannabis and seen how it like sets you apart. So it'll be cool to see some people do that a little bit more in agriculture. I have a few friends that are interested in stepping up their game that way, and I'm excited to see how the product comes out after you do some cool foliar stuff.
Yeah, the peppers love it. I mean, I've definitely done it with the peppers a lot, and they go crazy for all the different ferments and stuff. They just need a lot of calcium for sure, because those pods, man, they pack it on. But yeah, I'm excited for our pepper crop this year. I only did like, I think 13 different kinds, and
it's still a lot.
Pretty much. Yeah, well, I'm gonna have like 50 of each kind, except for one I have like 100 of them. A lot of them, it's basically base blends for hot sauce makers. A lot of habaneros and Bahamian goats, and also had Scotch bonnets and the Scotch brains. So those usually are a nice like base for a lot of hot sauces, and then they'll use some more profound and pronounced peppers in there to get like the heat up, or maybe tweak the flavor a little bit here or there, or something like that. But some really tasty ones. So we'll have a lot of them.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's some last year that I didn't get into too much until the end of the year that I got really excited about. I remember I did the Death Spiral ones that I made an oxtail stew with, and I learned last year that different peppers will affect your palate in different ways. So, for example, the Death Spirals, like I thought they were just going to be this crazy hot pepper that was tolerable, and it did. I mean, it had good flavor. It didn't have like habanero flavor, but the thing about it was it numbed my lips. It didn't affect my throat. It like literally numbed my lips in this way that was like very profound. Like no pepper has ever affected me before. And I don't know if it was you or somebody else, but they were explaining to me how that works. But I want to start to understand that more in spicy peppers, how different effects come from different peppers and why, and what qualities it is about the pepper that causes that. I don't understand it, but I definitely, my palate learned it last year for sure.
Yeah. I tend to like the crispier ones that have a little bit more sweetness that goes with them. I mean, they'll pack on some heat, but they're also some of the sweetest peppers. Like when we cut them, I'll let the kids smell them, and the first thing you smell is the sweetness. So it tricks you into taking a deep, deep smell because it smells so outrageously sweet, like the bubblegum sevens. And then as soon as you take that deep smell, it just punches you right in your sinuses, and your nose is starting to run off instantly. But yeah, I definitely like the oilier ones. They're crispy and oily. Some of them like the ghosts. They get a little. They're not as oily, but they also have like a thinner wall, and they dry out more. I like them more for like powders and flakes and stuff like that. I will eat them raw, but they're not. They're more floral. They're not as sweet and juicy as some of the other ones.
Yeah, I would say that about the Death Spirals. They're like a little bit more floral, and thinner wall. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun thing to learn about, and there's just hundreds of different kinds. And I mean, I was out in the garden yesterday, and I still had peppers on the vine from last season's plants that I didn't call. So
that's awesome.
I mean, speaking about Jadam practices, I don't think it's like really any crazy skill of mine. I just think it's like you said, they like a lot of calcium. I pretty much fed, I had a bag of gypsum that kind of ripped and was on the ground, and so I just grabbed like a half a handful or a handful, and I put it in my trash can like once or twice a week, and bubble it for 12 hours, and then I'll stimulate it with some Jadam tea or some lacto or whatever is around, maybe some of the Nice Organics Alive fertilizer that those guys were kind enough to give me a couple years ago, and use that. And I just think that simple biology allowed my plants just to live through the winter, which was really cool to see because I didn't cover them at all. And I just was like, all right, let's see what happens. And well into February, I still had a lot of peppers on the vine on multiple varieties, but then some started to die off. But there's still some that were like, I don't know if they're just like coming back. But yesterday I was like looking through the tall grass at the pepper plant underneath of it. And I saw some orange, and I like peeled it back, and I was like, oh shit, that's a pepper. Nice. And it was perfectly healthy. So
yeah.
Those kind of tests are what is exciting to me about gardening.
Yeah, it's fun, and it's fun to see the plants do their thing. Because like I got a couple pepper plants that I overwintered. I did have to put them in the garage a couple times because it got too cold. But because when they get less daylight hours and the heat goes down, the pods get smaller and they're not quite shaped like what you would want them to look like all the time. But so it's kind of cool to see how the plants still force out the pods. But I've got those plants getting ready to pop out flower, or they have flowers now. Got some mangoes forming on a couple of my mango trees too. So
that's really exciting. That's really cool.
Pretty stoked on that. Plenty of lemons and limes going too. So real stoked on all that.
Can't go wrong with plenty of lemons and limes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, got to make up for it. We killed our lemon tree not last winter, but the winter before. Got down to like 19 degrees here, which is crazy. And we did not have anything for it. So we lost a big old 8-foot tall Myers lemon tree, but got a new one.
That's yeah. Well, we live and learn, right?
Right. Now we got a greenhouse to throw it under in case it gets cold. So
yeah, I think my buddy and I are going to try to propagate a bunch of comfrey and nettle, like some taller nettle variety that we're going to try to propagate. And then I think I'm going to give him, like, I have some aloe plants in 3-gallon pots that probably have about 17 plants underneath of them that are like, literally they're so big and heavy under the 3-gallon pot that they're like falling over. Like I have trouble getting them to sit upright because they're just so top heavy that they're falling over. So I was talking to him, like, if you're going to be there for like 10 years, I'll just bring you this aloe plant and we'll just break it apart and plant it. So I was like, I'd rather just know it's going to be somewhere, and I don't want to go buy a $50 pot and put it in, And I would put it in the ground here, but I just don't know that I'm going to be here that much longer. Like with what I just described at the beginning of this podcast, it's like I think I'm like 1 to 2 crazy neighborhood events away from just being like, fuck it, I'll move back to the Bay and pay $2,000 for an apartment if I have to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the nice thing is if you do put it in a pot, you can like get them aloe. When you get them root bound, they tend to start popping out a whole bunch of pups.
That's what
I've got awesome. I was gonna say I got a poor aloe that's in a pot that has probably like 90 pups in the pot, and I just haven't gotten to it. And they just keep popping more pups, and you're like, oh god.
I know my 2 of my 3 are flowering right now, and I was like, I told my
That's
buddy,
cool.
I was like, I'd bring them now, but I'm gonna wait to like enjoy the flower of this plant, and then once the flower dies off, I'll bring it down to you. So
Yeah, that's real cool.
but yeah, I mean, it's cool to teach some of those methods that we learned from the shows. I mean, I was just talking to him about. I was like, well, listen, if you go Jadam stuff, you want to be harvesting things at dawn, and and then he was like, oh, I have all this. What should I do with it? And I was like, well, it's starting to flower, and he was like, yeah, and I was like, so basically, you're feeding the hormones of when you harvest whatever plant you're harvesting to Jadam, right? Whatever part of the cycle that's what you're fertilizing to the plant that you're giving it to. So if the plant's in the beginning of flower cycle and you go and you put it in a bucket, you ferment it, you jadam it, essentially what you're doing is you're making fertilizer for that time frame. So that would be a good thing to go and down the road feed all your pepper plants in like mid-July when you want to see them start flowering, and maybe you might be able to trigger them to flower a couple weeks sooner and not be harvesting everything at the end of October, more like the middle or beginning of October. And he was like, oh, that's cool. And it's those sort of tips that we were fortunate enough to receive from the Cho family and in some of the books they put out. I mean, I think those tips are really some of the most crucial, besides making IMO and things like that they were passed on to our community. And for some people maybe that's basic knowledge. For me it definitely wasn't. So I'm grateful to have received that and be able to share it with others.
Oh, same. I mean, those were really cool classes or seminars, whatever you want to call it, that we went to. So thanks again for taking me. But I mean, I think I knew how to make labs before all that and do some stuff, but I definitely picked up a lot of things on like the IMO, and that's definitely once you get to like what is it, IMO 4, when you start involving the animal manure waste and stuff like that, where I think that's really a critical cornerstone that a lot of KNF practices are missing out on. Whatever you want to label you want to put on a KNF, the Cho's Global Farming Network, whatever. But yeah, that animal manure mixed in with the IMOs takes it to a whole nother level. And I think that's where it's really, really critical when you're putting it back in the field to get all of the system working together. Like labs do their things great on their own. But I think like with some of the ferments, I noticed if you're not keeping it up with the IMO and stuff like that, the ferments kind of, it's not that they do anything bad. They just kind of hit like they just stop being effective really. But with that IMO jamming, you make sure your microlife's staying inoculated and really good. It's the animal husbandry is just critical, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I wish I could get like a couple pounds of compost from my farm. It's just so far away. It's such a commitment. And in order to get them to bring it down by the truckload, I have to get like 10 or 15 yards. And it's like, I would just stink out the whole neighborhood for like 10 days. And part of me is like, fuck it, I should. Like, fuck these people. But at the same time, it's just not, I just don't want to have the county called on us. Like, I already got a fine for how tall our grass got last year, which is kind of ridiculous. And I didn't even realize that was possible. But yeah, it's, things happen. But yeah, I mean, I just wish I had more of like a farm property to take on 10 or 15 yards of compost, because I'd really like to take it and play with it for another year and see what I can make it into.
Yeah, that would be nice.
But yeah, so in other news, a lot going on in the world this week. So maybe I want to tap into some current events, or what do you want to get into?
Yeah, let's jump into some current events. What's been standing out to you?
I mean, I guess a lot of things, honestly. But the one article I sent you, which is kind of really interesting, about the avian H5N1 bird flu moving into cattle, I think is kind of fascinating. We my coworker, who you know a little bit with the markets, got approached by several customers this past week discussing this article in Time Magazine about how the bird flu is spreading into cattle. And finally, I got a chance to read the article in the last 24 hours, and it's a potential issue. It seems like it's gotten into 9 states, into cattle in 9 states, and some researchers, like one from Cornell, was saying he was seeing it in 20% of samples that he looked at. Another researcher from Ohio State was saying he saw it in up to 40% of samples that he saw. That doesn't mean that it's transitioning to disease level in cattle, but they are seeing it in milk samples of otherwise healthy cows.
Right.
So, working for a farm that was affected by the bird flu and had to call a lot of birds and took a big financial hit from that. That's our primary focus is milk. This is a consideration. I know it's been brought up to us a couple times at work. We're definitely not affected as it is. But it makes me wonder about practices and where these things are coming from. And I know you know some things about milking cattle, so I'm curious your take on it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how it's like spread about the different states that it's in, and how it's not like the states aren't all connected. So that makes it seem kind of weird that it's just kind of like happening in some of those spots. But I mean, one thing that I thought about with that is that, they're not finding any active viroids in the milk. It's just like trace remains of it being that they're basically saying that it was present there at some point, which, to me, it doesn't seem like that would be a very big concern. It's kind of like when we make labs, we use the milk to purify out what we're producing to kill out all the different bacteria, so that all we have left is the lactobacillus bacteria. So to me, it sounds like that's kind of naturally occurring or something maybe. But even then, according to a lot of medical standards, if we're consuming those remains of the H5N1 viroid or whatever it is, then that's kind of like a natural vaccine, how they make some of their vaccines. So, to me, it's not a very big concern of mine when it comes to all that. I would be more concerned if the cows were acting weird. That's kind of something I would be looking at before I would be even super concerned with the milk, in my opinion. Because I think you're going to notice some behavioral changes in the cows really quickly, where you're going to probably not even put that milk to market anyways. You'd want to have it tested or look at it anyways, or just not capture it, just pump and dump.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because it brings a number of thoughts to mind. And among them is, I go back to the Will Harris original podcast on Joe Rogan, where he's talking about the mad cow disease. And apparently they were feeding, cow residue, like meat from cows to cows, right? And that's what causes mad cow disease. So in that regard, it does come down to like, okay, so what are we feeding the animals? And I did have a guy come up to me on Tuesday, and it was a little bit difficult to take this guy seriously because he was like somewhat of a zany Berkeley type. And he said, "Oh, do you feed your cows shavings from the chicken coop? Like basically like the poop and the shavings on the ground from the chickens?" And I was like, no, I just kind of didn't give him any more of an answer, so it's just like, that's ridiculous. But then I thought about it after he said it, because he was kind of lingering around the stand, and I realized that he was probably alluding to somewhat of this Time Magazine article or other articles that have been out about the bird flu thing. So I was like, what is your concern? And, he addressed it a little bit, and thinking about that's how mad cow disease got started, it definitely makes you think. And I didn't really have an answer for him, but then I also would say it makes me go back to the Joel Salatin podcast where he's talking about mRNA vaccines being given to animals. And so before you had to declare that you were giving your animals antibiotics or not, particularly in cows. And now they've been able to mask that with the mRNA vaccines, giving them to animals, but the farmer doesn't have to declare it. So even if I'm not saying this is the case in many cases, but even if you're like a grass fed, pasture raised animal purveyor, it's possible that you're giving your animals mRNA vaccines not knowing it. It's also possible that you're doing it purposely and don't have to declare it. It's coming through in ways that you may not even be aware of.
Well, yeah, and if you don't have to declare it, I mean, you could be, a 100% holistic farmer and just bought the wrong cow that already was vaccinated, and that other farmer didn't have to declare it, so you don't even know.
Or bought the wrong supplement, and be giving them a supplement that you thought was clean, but it actually had this in it, which is very possible because they don't by law have to declare that this vaccine is in something where they do with antibiotics, from what I understand. And that's a little bit scary. I mean, I brought this up to my farm and I was like, are you guys aware of this? And they were like, no. And they looked into it. I didn't really get much response afterwards. I didn't really follow up. But I think that with any herd, when you get to like 500 cows or you get to 5,000 cows or bigger, you may not know that this supplement or this thing that you're giving the cows that you think is all good may have something like that in it, especially if it's not by law needing to be declared. And I'm not trying to say this to like create any sort of paranoia, but it goes back to something you and I talk about frequently in terms of like knowing your food source, while also knowing, your farmer and having your farmer know what their sources are of what they're feeding their animals, which is becoming more and more difficult for whatever reason.
Right.
There's
no reason for it to cloud the transparency of where things come from or what's in them. There's no good benefit from that. So you can only assume there's malintent behind that.
For sure. And it was interesting this week at the same time. I was recommending this. You may follow them too on Instagram, Bean Family Farm. They seem pretty cool. They're down in SoCal and they do all kinds of like small scale animal husbandry, and they're really into growing comfrey. And I was looking up the variety of comfrey from the farm because he's trying to look for resources. So I turned him on to the Bean Family Farm, and then they had an additional post when we looked at their website, and it was actually about some company had sent them oregano oil. That was oregano oil and something else for their chickens. And that's something that I think you had brought up to me, but had been brought up to me during the time that we had our problems with the chickens at our farm. And I said, well, maybe you might want to think about giving a supplement of oregano oil. But now it's actually like bottled in a gallon size, kind of like something that like Build a Soil or somebody would sell, or our friends who had the Comfrey Extract Company, but it's like in a gallon kind of rectangle bottle. And, it's on a more commercial scale, not like a little tincture bottle. And it becomes a little bit more accessible. But it's something that, a lot of holistic farmers are going back to. Like, for let's say for our own diet. It's like, what can we put in our bodies to boost our immune system and avoid these things? And that's the holistic of that a lot of people on the level of the way we do things come at it from. And then you have people that are just like, oh, there's a problem, let's just give them antibiotics. And maybe there's some marriage in the two, but I'm always personally going to start with a holistic outlet.
Same. And you could have really shocked that guy and gave him some K&F details and be like, no, man, we don't feed chicken shavings to cows. We feed cow shavings to chickens, bro. Come on. You got it mixed up. Because, I mean, that is part of it. You taking the IMO and, Master Cho always talks about mixing the IMO back into the chicken feed and stuff. But we're going the opposite direction, We're not pumping it into the cows, into the milk and stuff. So something to think about.
Some conversations are a little intense for certain individuals, I think, but I try to keep it to 90 seconds clips at the farmers market, but sometimes you get 5 minutes to talk to someone. That's a nice thing actually about the Berkeley market. There'll be a little more time. Saturday and Sunday, I get, you got 60 to 90 seconds to talk to me tops. Like, you better make it count,
Yeah. It can be rough.
Yeah, which is, unfortunate because there are some people I really enjoy talking to. And the more I've gotten to know customers over the last few years, I'm like, oh, wow, you're an acupuncturist, or you're this, or you're that, or you have this perspective. And, I just, during COVID, started to think that pretty much everyone was this that lived in the city. But I've since learned that there's a lot of people that are like, I wouldn't say left or right, they're more just in the middle, and I think that a lot of people have started to move more to the middle with some of the zany political craziness that's gone on in San Francisco and everywhere that happened during COVID, and now is obviously happening on with campus riots and all this sort of religious craziness that's going on lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the mainstream media definitely wants to make it seem like everyone's on this left or right, and I definitely think there's a whole lot more of America that's just in the middle, and it just doesn't want to really be a part of either side of it. But the mainstream media definitely makes it seem like you're all this or you're all that. But yeah, the college, I don't know, what do you call them, protests, right? None of them have been riots yet, have they? It's destruction.
The mainstream media wants to tell you it's riots, but it's certainly protests so far.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on it, because I can break out some statistical analysis that I've learned this week, but I also kind of have strong views about it because I come from a parent who was very active during the Vietnam War protests and actually was arrested and put on the front page of the New York Times for defending a student friend of hers who had big Coke bottle glasses, like a guy who was kind of nerdy who was getting beat up by cops, and my mom went and jumped on the back of a cop and to try to get them to stop beating this guy with a baton. And turned out they took a picture of it and it was on the front page of the New York Times. And at the same time, her older brother, my uncle, was high up working in naval intelligence. So it started a very serious family dynamic from then on, and there's some real history that happened in our family from that. But this is the first thing that's happened in my lifetime that's ever reminded me of something like that before. So before I get too far into it, I'd just love to hear your view on it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a super in-depth, like, as far as like statistics or any kind of details like that. It just seemed very put on when you've got all these protesters that have the same tents and stuff like that. And there's food showing up for them when typical protests that I've seen firsthand, or from the 90s and early 2000s, it was pretty rugged. People were going hungry to be there. They really wanted to be there, and it didn't matter if they were getting fed good food and had a nice comfy tent that matched their neighbor's comfy tent. So instantly when you see that, you're instantly thinking, well, hey man, this has got to be funded. And
well, yeah, you want to talk about the funding a little bit? I'll share some statistics with you. There's three prominent groups that are funding this whole thing, and this is kind of undebatable. So I'm just going to share it, and people want to comment down the road when we release this, they can all they want. But the three organizations are Students for Justice in Palestine. Number two is Within Our Lifetime, and the third one is Jewish Voices for Peace. And all of these are funded by another organization called the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. And so if you work currently for the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, you're getting paid $7,800 for working 8 hours per week on any approved Palestinian campaign. Number one. Okay. And so that organization, the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, is funded by three main people. Obviously, one who a lot of independent people have brought up in the last couple of days, so I'm not afraid to do so. George Soros, the infamous one, in the Open Society, who is currently run by Alex Soros, his son, who is now dating, what is her name? Huma Abedin, the ex-wife of Congressman Weiner. You can't make this shit up. Okay? Who was like Hillary's number one assistant.
Yeah.
So before I get too into deep water or wind up on a kill list by the Clintons, I just want to kind of put that in. Howard Horowitz is the we Westpac president, and Westpac is a organization who, in the first three things that they're described on Wikipedia for doing, is agitation for they say public rights, I believe, but it's like along the spectrum of things that they're trying to they're willing to agitate to get their way. Okay, let's just say that. And then others were the multiple members of the Rockefeller family. So you have these political donors who also are huge in university funding, right? So PBD did a really good thing yesterday, and he was talking about he made the metaphorical example, right? Like you have student who when you're talking about a college campus, who are your most important clients, right? And so he asked his panel, and his panel says students, parents, and then the third one, which took a minute for the rest of the panel to come up with, was donors, right? And he's like, okay, well, let me give you this metaphorical example. On line one, you got a call from a multimillionaire parent of a student who's a small-time donor, let's say at Harvard, right? And let's even say it's a famous person. And then on line two, you got a call from Jorge Soros. Whose call are you taking? Oh, Leo, I got to call you back. I got to call you back.
Yeah.
I'm on the phone with Jorge Soros because he's giving the campus $100 million or whatever the fuck it is, right? So, these elite people are the ones who are funding the behind the scenes for a lot of presidents of Columbia University and, people that run UCLA and people that run USC and New York University. And I think that's an important thing for all of us to kind of digest, because we've seen it in terms of science in the medical field, in terms of what people are studying these days, and whether you're going to study vaccines for COVID or holistic medicine or whatever. We've seen that play out, but now to understand it from the backbone funding of the university, I think is more important on a certain level. Now we're seeing how it sociologically influences what we're actually about when it comes to protesting or politics or religion in the case of Palestine and Israel. And then what we're also seeing in regards to that is the riot police that are coming to campus, and these Zionist agitators, like in the case of what's being described at UCLA 2 days ago, are being funded by the same people that are funding the students that are out camping on these campuses. And so that brings it all back to May 2020 and BLM, and like, what the fuck are we really doing here? Like we're being purposely divided, in my opinion, by a globalist agenda and by people who don't give a fuck about America. And I really like listening to what PBD said yesterday, although I don't agree with him on a lot of levels. I'll say that here and now. But I do love how he's willing to have open conversation with people that don't agree with him. I admire him for that. I'm trying to learn from that as well. But at the same time, like, he was like, look, I don't care if you're Jewish, Christian, Catholic, whatever, like, or you're a Jew from Israel or a Jew from Hungary or whatever. If you're living in this country and you're America first, then like, I can get down with you, I can agree with you, I can do business with you. And I think really what we're being tugged at right now, and sorry to go on a little bit of a diatribe, but I think what we're really starting to question is, do these people involved have our country's best interests in mind? And I think that's really what we need to start questioning. And I'm glad that people with his level of form are starting to do so.
Right. I mean, it's insane. And George Soros has been funding the dissension and chaos for a long time. He was funding the whole southern invasion when Venezuela was going crazy, and all the Venezuelans were coming all the way up through Mexico with brand new shoes and iPhones and all that good stuff. Kind of similar to what's going on now still with everybody crossing the border down there.
On the Obama phones and the whole deal, yeah.
Yeah, and it was wild. I forget what year it was exactly, but he funded all the protests that turned into riots that burned Ferguson. and
Oh,
caused
sure.
Missouri, the campus, to lose all their funding for their athletics and stuff. Um, when they were really on an up and coming rise with the as far as the college level goes with the sports, and it basically caused Mizzou to just kind of fall into shambles with their football program, which is what it is, but it affects a lot of people outside of that too, and um, it's just interesting to see that happen in Missouri too, when you know what's going on in that kind of state where uh, they're the only state to ever overturn someone making it right to work, which was pretty awesome. And they've always had a lot of power in everything that they've done as far as being a voting constituency that people don't really get to just shove legislation down their throats. So it's kind of interesting to see Soros fund all that with Ferguson and just burn it down and create so much chaos there. And then, there's the whole fact too, if we're going to question if these people have our best intent, well, then look at everything else too. The fact that Soros's nephew is the cross-dressing leader of Ukraine, and how much money are we funneling over to Ukraine right now? When Americans don't have homes and we got so many homeless people and whatnot.
Oh, you just had to go there.
Well, yeah. I mean, how can you not?
I know.
Related. I mean, Soros could give them more money than we do.
So please do.
I mean, Soros could give him more money than we do. So it's crazy that we even give him any money.
Well, I mean, speaking about Ukraine, like I kind of pissed my friend off this week who's there. I have a friend who I met online, and I just got to know her because I was like, I want to kind of know what's going on in Ukraine. And like we just gave $300 million out of the last, funding bill for Israel, and the money went to Taiwan, who's richer than we are, and a bunch of money went to Ukraine. But we gave $300 million to border control in Ukraine. Okay. And I have a friend in Ukraine who would like to do anything but live in Ukraine right now and get the fuck out of there. Okay. For her safety, because there's rockets being fired at her city 5 nights a week, all night long, and she can't leave because the military's, because of her schooling, making her stay there. Okay. So when we're giving $300 million to border protection, nobody's trying to go into Ukraine right now. Nobody wants to go in there. There's nobody coming from fucking Moldova or Poland or anywhere else going, hey, I want to go be a martyr and fight for Ukraine. Nobody's trying to do that. No NATO troops are volunteering to go into Ukraine right now unless they're forced to. And so we're preventing Ukrainians from leaving by giving them $300 million. We're making them stay there, lambs for the slaughter. And like, she got really offended when I said that to her this week. I didn't say it in those regards, but that's literally what's going on. And, I'm saying it because I feel sorry for these people because they don't have food. None of the aid is getting to them to help them eat. They're paying more in Ukraine currently for their milk and bread than we're paying in the United States, which is crazy considering their economy. And they're literally eating milk and bread if they can. They barely have enough food at the, refugee centers and these different centers that are set up to like try to help people through. There's no jobs. There's full-on corruption all the way down. So even if you're working these days, you're working for like $100 US a month, right? Where your rent's going to be like $150. No one's lowering that part of it. And yet they're being forced to stay there in a situation where they can't win. And 60-year-old men and 15-year-old boys are being trotted out into a war that they absolutely cannot win, right? So it is, it in a lot of ways is not as vile as what's going on in Palestine, but it's vile. And it's literally, backed by Cargill and BlackRock and fucking Open Society and these globalists that are like using this to like finance their military partners. And it really has nothing to do with like an ethical or moral standing anymore. It's very clear. And it's crazy as an American to have to like look at Russia for like actual, realistic thinking. Like it's like, you go back in time with that whole thing, and I think we've talked about this before, but the most important part I thought of the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin was like, he's like, yeah, I tried to join NATO in 2004, 2006, and I was told we can't. And imagine if Russia did join NATO, we'd have a great business relationship with them. And we wouldn't created nearly as many weapons to use. So the military industrial complex would have not profited nearly as greatly. But other than that, the world would be a much safer, better place right now. And instead, we're like, I would say we're in World War III currently. I really have a hard time saying that we're not.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty wild, and I mean we're not entirely much different than what Ukraine's done to themselves with their leadership, especially when Zelensky and his ties, and basically his entire cabinet didn't have any political experience before he put them in there. They're all just his Hollywood buddies from their whatever European Hollywood.
He was a comedian that made most of his humor came from dressing up as a transvestite. Like, let's be frank, and that's.
But that's the trend here.
I'm not pulling that out of my ass by any means.
Yeah, but that's the trend here, and people are looking to influencers this and influencers that, and they're just trying to make things look more and more like the whole Capital off of the Hunger Games. If you ever seen that movie or read the books or anything like that, it's just over the top with it's mutilation of people's bodies and whatnot, whether they want to look like animals or whatever, But people are, the transhumanism thing going on and voting for weirdos that who knows what's going on. But we definitely can see where our military's, like you said, we're funding everything over there. And who's going to fight for the U.S.? Like the Ukraine's having to pull 50-year-olds and 15-year-olds, and no one can even be in the U.S. military. Everybody that had a brain got out and was kicked out when they refused to take the vaccines. And then what do you have left to run it? And now they've been talking about drafting women for the past couple of years, just hee-hawing about it and chewing on it just to see what people say, I guess. So you start drafting women, that's going to be a joke.
I mean, yeah, it's, the feeling that I'm getting, I knew about the campus riots, and I worked very hard between Saturday and Tuesday, so it's difficult for me to do too much research. But the last few days in doing a little research, I really am concerned with how close we're getting to the potential of civil war, and I do know that that's been a potential agenda for some crazy people at the top of the totem pole in the elites, but I never thought we were like that close, or I always thought there was enough, Americans that would buck up against it or whatever, that it wasn't like a on the horizon reality. But in the last couple days, some people like, the PVD interview that I listened to, Breaking Point's Crystal and Sagar. I mean, the policy that got okayed through Congress with not saying negative things about Israel or anti-Semitism, and how that can be defined now in terms of the way we discuss another country or politicians from another country, is just so over the top and so purposely agitating that I really think that, there is I wouldn't say a percentage, but a strong faction that is leading us down a path that may wind us up in that direction. And that is a really scary point to be at. And I really try not to like be doom and gloom or always try to like look at the glass as half full and all that sort of stuff. And it's really hard to look at this stuff and maintain that. But, that's where comedy comes into play. And I love people like Tim Dillon, and they're able to like shed humor while shedding light on this sort of stuff. But, where we're getting to currently is really wild. And I think that what got passed 2 days ago, without saying anything in an anti-Semitic way, is the closest we've gotten to eroding the freedom of speech part of the Constitution in our lifetimes. It really is, because we're talking about another country at the end of the day. We're talking about another culture. We're talking about religion which isn't predominant in this country, and irregardless if it was the number one religion in this country, it doesn't matter. Like we've had these rights for hundreds of years, and now they're being eroded. You can't say negative things about a particular faction that are fully engaged in genocide, fully engaged. And I hope people wake up to this, because if you don't wake up to this, then what do we have left, really?
Well, yeah, and on a first really shallow level, I think it makes needs to be said is, what is a Semite? You know, it's not a Jew. It's not just a Jew. You know, Semites include a group of people, which also includes a lot of Muslims and whatnot.
Sure.
And you know, and when you get to the stems of it, Semite means they came from Shem, according to biblical history. So again, we have Bible being used in a lot of our history things, but you know, if we follow the history of people, it's brings a lot of things up. But when it comes to the Civil War, I mean, I definitely think the mainstream media and the powers that be definitely want to make it feel like it's a civil war. I think they try and overemphasize the amount of cuckoos that are on the far left and the far right, you know, through the media and everything. But you know, I think there's a really large amount of Americans out there that aren't on either of it, and they're very much in the middle and wouldn't want to have anything to do with the Civil War.
I agree.
It would ultimately, if you were to really look at it, it would end up looking like three people fighting, three different groups, and the biggest group is the people that say "fuck you guys, get this shit out of here." And I think another a thing that kind of helps bring that home too is like when we look at Joe Biden being the most popular president elected ever. You know, he had the biggest voting turnout, which is, we all know, is crazy. Didn't happen. But I think what they're definitely doing is positioning things to make it look like there's going to be a lot of ascension. And if they could stir up something in one spot here, one spot there, I think it's all a guys to get the you know, the troops with blue helmets, the UN on U.S. soil. And I think that's the number one goal for sure. Whether it's down at the border.
I think that's a really key point. I mean, I do think that I've said to you for a bit, and I've said it out loud, that, you know, I'm not concerned about who's going to win this election as much as I am concerned about the reaction that the other side has to winning the election and how it's going to be manipulated. And I think,
or if we get there.
If we get there. And I think part of what's happening right now is just that playbook playing out. So it's like, whatever we can do to get the UN or more of the militarized, you know, elite protectors on the soil or whatnot is the agenda that's playing out right now. And I don't think that I think that majority of the American population, I agree with you, is not taking the bait. But that's also why I really, in this podcast and this discussion, want to make the point that the same people are financing both sides right now. So as much as like I'm concerned and I'm fired up, and that's obvious, and I'll certainly admit to it, you know, and I'm the one who brought up Civil War. At the end of the day, it's like, you know, the same people are tugging the strings on both sides, and so we need to recognize that, and we need to revolt against it. And you know, when Crystal and Sagar and Breaking Points were talking about this legislation that got passed by Congress as far as the anti-Semitism and the talking about Israel or anti-Jewish rhetoric or whatever, it wasn't as much anti-Jewish as it was anti-Israel. And when they were talking about that, they were like, I think our only hope left is for it to go to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court to, you know, function with some, you know, critical thinking and shut this down. And if it even gets there, and that's wild that we're at that point in terms of this legislation is the biggest attack on freedom of speech that we've had yet. And that's saying a lot, because we really witnessed it during COVID. And we really, it's kind of like the Oklahoma City bombing being the pretense to the Patriot Act. When you really look at the timeline of history, the Patriot Act would have never happened without the domestic legislation against terrorism that got passed after the Oklahoma City bombing. And very much the same thing is kind of playing out in terms of censorship and what happened during COVID and not being able to talk about certain things, and how social media networks, you know, struck you down if you were saying certain things, if you were talking about how it came out of a lab, or how you were talking about the vaccines didn't work, or whatever your take on it was. If you're going against their mainstream rhetoric, they were shutting you down. And now now the same thing is happening in regards to a country outside of America. Like, that's really wild.
I mean, they even took a former president off a social media platform. So, I mean, it's been wild. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm not someone that, like, I personally, as far as this, I'm not looking for a president to fix all the problems, right? But if I had to pick one of the three candidates, and I know we go back and forth about this a little bit, like for me, I'd certainly pick RFK. I think that he would attack certain things and give the ordinary person a little bit more of a chance if he was allowed to. Whether he'd be allowed to or not, that's a whole nother debate. But if I have to pick between two, which we kind of tend to need to, I'm certainly not picking Biden. I'll say that. But I also, at the same time, I don't look at Trump as someone that's like, I don't look at him as a fascist, but I do wonder if he's allowed to get back in office, how much of the globalist playbook he's going to have to play from. So, and he's definitely on the side of Israel. So it's like going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because it looks pretty obvious that he's going to win. I think anybody with a decent head on their shoulders right now is like bracing for the fact that Trump is going to get back into office. And in some ways, maybe that's a positive thing. But now we're really going to see his relationship to Israel play out and his relationship to globalism play out, because they're now pressing the button and it's like on steroids. So that's what's really playing out right now. And then, so how much is he going to have to answer to that? And how much is he a part of the deep state? And how much is he really against the deep state? That's what we're going to see now.
Well, and what's interesting is is knowing certain facts that a lot of the mainstream media doesn't talk about, like the fact that when Israel bombed Palestine, they didn't bomb Palestine to bomb them. They bombed the oldest Christian church in all of Palestine. Christians have been misproportionately killed in all those wars compared to any other ethnicity or religious background, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to the wars going on in the Middle East and Palestine and all that right now. And even when it comes to Trump, I don't think Trump's doing anything that would be on the side of real peace. He moved the what was it? I'm having a brain fart for the title of what it was, but when he moved the church in Israel or whatever, back when he was president,
he moved it out of Jerusalem or whatever, or he moved it.
Or they basically took back land or something. But even the Christian church asked them, "Don't do it." They told him, "Hey, this is not anything you need to do." And they've never been given a voice. Tucker Carlson had an interview with a pretty prestigious Palestinian Christian pastor who is, I guess, pretty outspoken for the whole group. And
from Bethlehem,
he was talking about how,
where they don't allow tourists to go to, which would really financially save Palestine. Let's keep in mind. But go ahead.
Right. And he was talking about how they've been petitioning every presidency and all these presidents to not continue these wars and not to start these things. They brought up that, they're not even they're not bombing Muslims, they're bombing Christians. And every presidency shot them down. And like you said, with Trump moving the Capitol or whatever it was, it's not a Capitol. I'm sorry, I don't have the right lingo for it. But, and then it's if you follow Christian theology and what they're predicted to come, I mean, Trump's been right on cue with the Satanist side of creating the three churches where they created the big Black Cube Muslim church, and they have the Jewish church and the Christian church all up on the hill, and it's all with the in cue with the Vatican and the Holy Roman Church bringing forth the one world religion, that's supposed to unite everybody in peace. So it's really interesting when people look at Trump to be like some kind of savior or something like this and that, when in reality, if we're looking at what's going on over there with the Zionist military state bombing Palestine right now, and knowing that Trump is on that side, he's been over there in Israel kissing that wall and all that stuff. There's plenty of pictures of it. And, so when they purposely refuse to listen to people and are causing deaths that they know they're causing, it just really makes you think, obviously he's not doing anything for real peace, and it's still part of an agenda, whatever that agenda is, we're seeing it unfold here too.
Well, yeah, I mean that's why it's like, as Whitney Webb talks about, like it's just you can't look at anymore as a political candidate or even a presidential candidate as being a savior. And if you are, you're just naive. Like it's just we need to dissect the political structure and reshape it, really, if anything. And that's just one step of many that need to be taken in order for ordinary people to get some power back. And I think about that pastor from Bethlehem. One of the points that I thought he made that was really interesting is that like 20% of the population in Israel is Christian. And yet, if you're an evangelical Christian, you're not really recognized by the government of Israel. And they make it super difficult for you to do basic things like get a marriage license. So,
and food.
And food, for example. And I mean, we could go into that with Palestine really easily, but I'm talking about just like in Israel, like they make your life really difficult. Yeah. 20% of your population. So what a lot of people don't understand when they're, speaking from a perspective that is considered anti-Semitic or whatever in regards to Israel, is that, there's a huge Muslim population, there's a huge Christian population there. It's not predominantly Jewish. But when you realize that large population of Christians are persecuted by the Israeli government, then it becomes really interesting. And you definitely have a conversation worth having. And, I am starting to see where, the Judaism is constantly claiming persecution, but then when the shoe's on the other foot, they're the ones contributing the most to it in their capital, shall we say. And so it's very hypocritical in nature if these statistics are true. I haven't been to Israel, so I can't say, definitely this way, but it does seem like that's really the way it is in a lot of ways. And I'm not trying to be anti-Semitic in any way. I mean, I'm trying to be accepting of all religions, but at the same time, like, why is our government, like, especially on the Republican side, which is really interesting. Like, I'll condemn the left all fucking day long. Don't get me wrong. I'm disgusted with them recently, from Biden all the way down to AOC. But when you talk about the Republican faction, who, I became more open-minded to during COVID because I chose not to get vaccinated, and they were the only ones like Rand Paul who was like saying anything against Fauci, let's say. But now they're very much on the side of Israel and funding them and not saying anything against Palestine and continuing to send money to them hand over foot, etc. And yet, like, they're claiming being Christian values, right? And yet they're sending money over there that's bombing Christian churches and bombing universities that are predominantly Christian and not allowing Christians to live in peace in Israel, a country that we're giving, what is it, like $3.2 billion or more every year or two through various AIPAC funding and whatnot. Then you really start to raise some questions of, like, what is the intention really? And I think that pastor really, in a very non-confrontational way in that Tucker interview, pointed to some of that stuff that was, I'm really glad that you got me to listen to that, because it's like, wow, okay, like, this is really like different rules for me than for you. And that compromise isn't going to work for the future of the world in any regards. It doesn't matter. Like, I always say to people that are very Christian or very Jewish or very Muslim or whatever, I'm like, yeah, but the problem for me with religion is, why is my God better than your God? Right? Like, if you were raised in Malaysia and all you knew is like the Hindu religion in your village that you were surrounded by, then you can't expect someone to, like, all of a sudden convert to Christianity and say, like, oh, that God's better than my God. That's all they've known their whole life. So, like, why not just accept this, like, entity that we all view from different perspectives as being, that's where I look at, like, I don't think it'll ever happen. Everybody agrees to, like, a one world global religion. But I think an acceptance of a higher power that can be interpreted by the individual in any way they want is perfectly okay. I don't understand why my God has to be better than your God. It's just the way I interpret my God. So my view personally is going to be stronger for me than it is for you, but it doesn't mean that my God's better than your God. I don't get that part.
Well, I think, I mean, it's hard to talk about when you put it in perspective of like saying better than. I mean, to a lot of religions, they don't think their God's better than another God because, I mean, I think many religions look at the other religions as not existing. Can't be better than something that doesn't exist to them, you know. So I think it just comes down to how you treat people and all that. As far as like, even if you don't believe in their God, then you should still treat them in a way that would make them want to talk to you and think you're a good person to like maybe lead them to something that would help them. But if you're going in there with an egotistical, you know, this militant mindset that we're better here and you have to do this and you have to be part of what we have, well, that's not going to get people to convert. And that's not going to get people to want to be a part of anything. And so I think that is the basis of whatever, you know, whatever you're trying to accomplish, it needs to be through persuasion, especially when it comes to stuff when we're talking about religion and things like that. And when religions don't use persuasion and they don't use open dialogue and they instead use legislation and military might, I think that kind of shows, you know, whatever's going on. I don't really want to be a part of that religion because that doesn't really seem like what it's supposed to be. But, and then, you know, like you brought up how all these quote unquote right-wing Republican government leaders all claim Christian values here and there, yet they're funding Israel and they're funding war and they're pro-war this and pro-bombing that and killing people. And then we need to look at how many of them actually have dual citizenship. You know, there's a very large percentage of the people in charge of our Congress that have dual citizenship to other countries that they're trying to pass legislation to keep you from talking bad about them.
Yeah.
So that's another very concerning issue that just kind of strengthens the whole fact that they're not even promoting Christian values and they're not real Christians, are they? If they have dual citizenship to Israel, and we know how Israel treats their indigenous and evangelical Christian population, they wouldn't be allowed to come here. They wouldn't be allowed to leave.
Well, I think their allegiance is at that point is no longer to their actual religion; it's to their cult of power, and which is, you can describe as Zionism or however you want to describe it, but it really just seems like, you know, I don't care if you're talking about like Masons, Jesuitism, Zionism, whatever. It's like this power structure that they're latching onto, and they just want to be part of the winning team at the end of the day. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether they're Judeo-Christian or Protestant or whatever. It's like really what they're willing to do is make whatever decision so that they can be on the winning side, and that's usually lately seems like it's getting done through military might. And that, you know, I just in the last few days have never really felt anything in my lifetime like what we're seeing in terms of the purposely creating instability. And I personally don't really have very strong religious feelings, and I try to be accepting of most religions, and I try to also keep my distance from some of the more extremist views. But now I'm starting to see this like underlying desperate kind of reach, which, you know, the elites have been losing for a long time, and it seems like there's only so much longer they can keep the printing press going and building weapons and doing everything there and controlling our food system and all this sort of stuff before people really wake up. But now, you know, with all of these wars going on, it's like they're spreading us very thin, almost to try to come in and take control over not only the conversation in the U.S. but probably our personal rights, and that is disconcerting to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of tongue in cheek said that I always kind of saw it going down as kind of what was the movie No Children Oh man, I
They're
can't remember the
Children of
name of the movie
Men.
now. Yeah, Children of Men.
Yeah,
I always kind of saw it going down to like Children of Men meets like kind of V for Vendetta sort of.
yeah.
And I think when you see things like the legislation being passed so that we can't speak ill of a certain people, when the verbiage to say Semite and stuff like that is crazy, when you have to break down what a Semite is, like I said. So I think it just shows, like, I think we're definitely, like you said, we're in a slippery slope where we're losing rights. And I think, like you said, if they keep people spread thin and they really control the narrative, then no one's really aware of this mass amount of us that are out there that aren't pro right or pro left, and we just want this shit to end. We just want pedophiles to stop being in charge of our country, and we just want to be able to, like, when we find out there's a mass list of pedophiles like the Epstein list, we want to know who's on it, right? But we still don't have that list.
Yeah.
And we're tired of it. But they're silencing that voice, and they're creating false voices through their voting machines, Dominion, because break down verbiage, they love to use those words, and then they just create chaos. And they have dissenters come in here like Soros, who funds the chaos, who has plenty of Zionist ties, yet he funds the other side constantly to create chaos. And I think it's all just, like I said earlier, I think it's a guise to get the UN on the U.S. soil, because we can't take care of ourselves, whether it's war and shit breaking out, or we're about to lose our power system or something, or who knows. But we're talking about sending all our military capable men over to Ukraine, possibly. And then what's left behind is we have all these military age men coming across the border. All these military age men from Iraq and Afghanistan and China,
Well, and meanwhile, we're going to lose our ability to like have independent media, which we've seen it get. I mean, you and I have talked about, Rogan and PBD and these different people, and whether they're, captured, and I don't subscribe to that completely. I have to hold out hope for some of these forums to be, most of their intention be in the right place, but our ability to find those sources and listen to that information is critical in terms of our, if all we had was the mainstream media and it was as captured as it seems recently, then all we're getting is propaganda. Then how much better are we than Nazi Germany? We're not any better. We're the fucking same. And I was discussing this with my roommate last night, and I said, he's got really extreme views of what's going on right now, but he had a very interesting perspective, I thought, which I'm not going to share here. But it reminded me of something that was said to me like a solid 15 years ago, and that was that the Nazis were the fast play and the U.S. is the slow play by the same people. And the more I've studied history, the more I've read, the more that I see the way things play out, the harder it becomes to deny that.
Well, I mean, how many Nazis died at Nuremberg?
What's that?
How many Nazis died at Nuremberg? Like 5?
Really? Okay.
Yeah. The rest all came here. We brought them over here, gave them, immunity, made them our scientists, put them in charge of things.
Chile or whatever. Yeah, for sure.
Bayer. We have Bayer over here in the Midwest running things. Bayer's a Nazi company.
Hugely involved hugely involved with Argentina, hugely involved with NASA is what I want to say. A lot of Nazi scientists are hugely involved with NASA when you look into it. That's something that's like undeniable if you look into it. I'm pretty sure YouTube will still allow you to find that sort of information.
Oh yeah.
That was shocking to me. I was like, Jesus Christ. Okay. This is where we're at, and I had seen in a lot of studies about Nazis that Hitler actually abandoned trying to create the atomic weapon in order to create supposedly an unidentified flying object went down in the Black Forest in like 1937 in Germany. And they tried to, reinvent that, take that technology and reinvent it. And they spent a lot of time at a base in Poland trying to do that. and they talk about this in like Ancient Aliens, but I went and did some other research and found that there is something to be said for the truth behind this. And it does kind of make sense because it seemed like even watching Oppenheimer, we started very late on the atomic weapon, and yet we got to the party first. And so it makes you think like, okay, like this international or this space travel type of thing is what he focused a lot of their scientific research on, and it kind of makes you wonder how things played out. And then come to find out later in years when I was researching Hitler a little bit that he had a personal doctor that was feeding him meth every day for like, you know, it's 7 or 8 years. So I mean, I think anyone knows that if you're doing you know, even really high quality speed every day for 7 or 8 years, at a certain point, you know, years into it, you're going to kind of fly off the deep end, and you're going to be more easily controlled, even though you might have these outrageous, you know, rifts of energy and craziness. Like you're not going to be as creative with your thought, and you're going to make some poor egotistically based decisions. And I think that's really, looking back at history, what probably happened with Hitler. And it makes you wonder who was behind him pulling the strings at that point in time. And like you said, if we majority of the people that ran the Nazi party and we, you know, split them up between, you know, England and Russia and us, and place a bunch of them down in Argentina, and now there's all these like heart-based, you know, things down in Antarctica. It's like what the fuck is really going on in this world? Like you really have to start wondering.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. And you find out like Hitler had Muslim troops, and they had troops and soldiers that wore like fez hats and stuff. And, you know, so it clearly wasn't just all about the master race and whatnot. And then, you know, he wears the same cross as the Queen of England. And, you know, it just goes on and on. We have some high political people, you know, that have names that mean Red Cross that, you know, are in and they happen to fund the buying of the land where Israel's at now. So, you know.
And they happen to have the same family symbol as a Knights Templar, but it's wild.
It's just super wild. So I mean, it's definitely worth tracking down history and following these bloodlines and whatnot. And you can, you know, some of these people definitely pencil themselves into existence out of nowhere, and it's we can definitely get in more detail on it when it comes to like who the people are that are actually in Israel and where they came from and who they're related to and all that good fun stuff. It's pretty wild. It's not a small short topic by any means, but
yeah, well, I mean, it brings you back to what you said about like the Epstein list, for example. And if this manipulation of children was going on this scale by elite people or pawns of elite people, and it's being condoned by elite people, then by the elite, then, you know, who's to say that these people aren't capable of even worse atrocities when it comes to large masses of people? And I think that's what the Epstein list really kind of, you know, makes anyone that's capable of critical thinking really think about it. It's like, okay, well, if you're engaging on mass levels of pedophilia, then it's easy to look the other way when you're bombing out 36 hospitals in fucking Palestine, or tearing down every university, or bombing every Christian church, or whatever that's going on in a whole city. Or, you know, like I listened to an interview with a general on Piers Morgan today while I was driving around running errands earlier, of the IDF, and he was like a Britain, Israel, IDF. He was in the IDF for 20 years, but now he's like a liaison between Britain and Israel. And he was talking about how, like, oh, you know, we've been very conscientious not to bomb out civilians in Palestine and blah, blah, blah. And even Piers Morgan, who is a major Israeli sympathizer, like, let's not get it twisted, okay? He majorly is. And he was like, dude, like, how can you say that when, and he started showing like a video thing on whatever network he's coming at it from. I was just watching it through YouTube, so I don't even know where you can find Piers Morgan these days. You'd have to look that up for yourself. But he was like, dude, how can you say that when there's like all these videos of atrocity being committed by IDF forces, like where they're showing them doing crazy shit in people's houses in Palestine, doing other things that are just like totally over the top, like some of the worst war crimes you'll see on the ground. And he's like showing video clips of that. And the IDF guy who's just got this very nice, eloquent British accent, kind of like delivery, is just sitting there and sugarcoating it to the best of his ability. And goddamn, that guy sounded good. But if you are capable of any level of critical thinking, you can definitely discern that like this dude is a spokesman that's trying to sugarcoat a horrible genocide that's going on here.
Yeah.
And when you look at mere statistics and the fact that half of the population in Gaza is under 18 years old, and 25,000 or more, I'm sure the number's higher, honestly. That seems like a really low number, but that was the number they were saying of women and children that have been killed so far. And you look at all the buildings that have been blown up and whatnot, and you're like, dude, you guys have no regard for innocent civilians. Like, don't even fucking pretend. And these, whether you want to talk about Netanyahu or Biden or whoever, like we're all if we're condoning our politicians to send money to do that, we're all complicit at the end of the day. So like at a certain point, like what is it going to take for us to take some responsibility for either the Ukrainian people or the people of Palestine, or is it going to be the people of Taiwan? Or like somebody made a really good point yesterday that I heard, and they're like, okay, you're anti-war. Okay, let me live. And I think it was actually Adam on PBD, and he said a list of all the wars that were going on currently. And there's like 3 in Africa, and there's Syria, and there's Israel, and there's the what's going on in Yemen, and there's like 9 certain wars going on around the world right now. And then there's, I'm sure, smaller skirmishes that you maybe don't describe as war, but they're still genocidal in terms of their taking out cultures or taking out villages or whatever right now going on in the world. And he's like, name one more that you've gone out and protested. And the student was like, well, I can't really name one. And they're like, so you're not a war protester. You're an anti-American protester. You're an anti-Israel protester, and you're an anti-Semitic protester. And Adam obviously is very pro-Israel in his rhetoric, so take that for what it's worth. But I think it was a really good point that he made in terms of like, don't call yourself an anti-war protester if all you're doing is going out and protesting this war that you're getting food catered to your tent to fucking do.
Right.
Like, let's be frank here. Because I mean, there's a lot of things I won't do to make money, but damn, you tell me I can work 8 hours a week to make $7,800 and go and figure out a pro-Palestine campaign to go be a part of, like, fuck, it makes you think.
Yeah, it does, for sure. It's wild. And then like we're talking about with the whole bombings and then bombing the oldest Christian churches, another thing to research is when they bombed Nagasaki in Japan and stuff, they bombed the oldest Christian church in all Japan. So I think I think something to really pay attention to here is the trend of things, and a lot of things aren't put out there in broad daylight for people to know, but you have to do your own research. And once you start looking into what these people are doing, whether someone wants to believe in Christianity or not, I mean, all these people doing all these crazy things around the whole world sure do, and they sure believe in the opposite side of it, and they're doing their damnedest to carry it out. So, I mean, people definitely need to at least study up and do a little research into what these people's motives are and what they think they're doing anyways. Whether you believe it or not, they're following a script that's been written a long time ago, and they're either sticking with it or they're trying to speed it up and they're trying to hide things here and there. But they're definitely, the more people who actually research these people and understand what their motives are, they'll at least understand why they're doing this shit and why we need to fucking get them the fuck out of here and not vote for any of these people anymore and not be for any of this war. Because just like we're seeing, it's 2 sides that are funded by the same people, and everybody that in the middle gets killed.
Well, yeah, and it's very difficult these days to do research, right? So,
Right.
I did a little test yesterday with my YouTube, and I went on it through a different forum just to check, and it was really interesting that I was getting the same things advertised to me to look up, right? And so, finding articles or reading things in books, or not getting your information delivered to you through digital corrupted formats is challenging, but also really necessary. And especially if you're going back into history, because a lot of this history, that's part of the benefit of the internet, is like everything gets put digitally, but then it also can be like erased really easily. So that's why the
Right.
written word in books is so critical, because the Nazi book burning parties that they show in like Indiana Jones, for example, that's one of my favorite scenes in a movie, not because of the great
Right.
scene or the story, but it's actually just the symbology of what that actually meant. And I realized, I
Same.
have parents that are writers, and I realized the importance of the written word from that. And I think that as we get further into censorship and we get further into legislation being passed where you can't talk badly about another country or another culture or another religion, it becomes more and more challenging to find pertinent information when you're talking about history or talking about current events or whatever. And so, we've talked about this before in our podcasting forum, and I think this is an important thing to say right now, is like, please, if you're like down the road watching this and you're reviewing it and you're like, oh, these guys don't know what they're talking about, leave us a reference to learn from, because I think our goal in this is to learn and to get to know more. And I feel like, as much as I have people that are like, wow, you're really knowledgeable about this stuff, and I'm like, I only feel like I'm scratching the tip of the iceberg. I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable at all, and I want to learn more, and I wish I had more time to read and research, but I still have to make a living. And I think you're the same way in terms of like, nowadays, how do we find the information? How do we find the history? Like, we've talked about researching certain topics, and it's not easy digitally anymore. So, I certainly encourage anyone listening to this to go do your own research, share it with us, find other information, find other perspectives, because you're not going to gain all the knowledge from one or two or three perspectives. It's multiple perspectives, it's multiple accounts of history, and then you discern your own view of it. It's like the Kennedy assassination. How many different viewpoints of it do you have to see to be able to glean a perspective that you're comfortable with sitting on?
Right. Yeah. And like you said, it's getting harder and harder to find that research. I mean, in terms of digital, you got to think about how would you even get anything out there for people when they start choking things down? You know, you can't even think about the dark web really. I mean, what that was funded by DARPA. So it's
Yeah.
all there's no such thing as anything. It's all controlled. It's all allowed. So yeah, I mean, like you said, and written form, and then being in public, talking to people, and I think
Yeah, I mean,
that's
Sergey Brin and Eric Schmidt were recruited while they were still in Stanford by DARPA to do Google.
yeah, and but that's the important thing is people got to talk to people,
Yeah.
and that's part of the whole COVID agenda and shit like that is to get people to wear masks. Is people aren't talking to people. How many people shake hands now? You know,
I mean,
it's just
cell phones. Look at how many people like they're uncomfortable, in a line or whatever, and they pull out their cell phone and look at them. And like I do it too. I'm way worse about my cell phone than I was 5 years ago, than I was 10 years ago. And I had a cell phone in like 2000. I've had a cell phone now for like 24, 25 years, and I'm way worse about it than I've ever been before.
I
And
mean, I hate my cell phone.
I'm really trying to find avenues outside of my cell phone. Like I've even, I was giving my brother shit who works in Hollywood recently, and I was like, yo, like, can you guys start putting out some decent movies? Like I want to go to see a movie and turn my phone off for 2 hours. Like that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Train myself to get away from my phone for a while. And like just absorbing this sort of information, it's overwhelming. Like I definitely see where, we both, I think, watched the Tucker Carlson interview on Joe Rogan, which I think we both agreed was really good. But Joe Rogan's describing like what sent Alex Jones off the deep end. And it's like, look, like you're absorbing all this information all the time. Like that will break you no matter how strong you are. And especially when you put things on top of it, like drinking too much or blowing coke or whatever somebody might do just to be able to deal with the stress, porn or whatever the fuck it might be. Like it will send you over the top. And, you know, going back to that, I mean, you know, I have to say that, like, my favorite part of that interview was when Rogan plays the interview from 2017 with Alex Jones, and Alex Jones is like describing how AI and the technocracy is going to play out and how the elite want it to play out in 2017, and you apply that till now, and you're like, Jesus Christ, how did you know that? Like that, like the way he describes it, and he starts talking about the 12 different dimensions and blah blah blah, and it's, you know, something that at least for me, I had to go back and listen to like 3 or 4 times, and it's a little drastic in certain ways from my mind, but the core essence of what he's describing is exactly what's playing out right now, like almost to a T. And I haven't heard anyone in 2024 describe the technocracy era and AI and the way things are playing out currently as well as he described it in 2017. And I'll definitely give him his credit on that, even though I've certainly been an Alex Jones hater previously.
Yeah, I mean, he's a hard pill to swallow. You know what I mean? That's, with a lot of those guys, they have some facts here and facts there or whatever, but he's definitely a hard pill to swallow if you like him or not. But like you were saying, it's important. Like, you know, you go down the rabbit hole for a little bit, and then you got to come out. You can't stay down there focusing on all the crazy shit nonstop. Otherwise, that's all you're going to see, and that's all it's going to be your life, and it's going to eat you up. But you got to just come out of the rabbit hole and enjoy the sunshine and the fresh air, and hopefully they're not chemtrailing too hard that day, and you know, just get some peace and, you know, focus on the things that really matter, because, you know, how long has Epstein been going on and all that shit with Ghislaine Maxwell and stuff? It's been going on for a long time, and we're not, you know, does it really affect your daily life of going outside and planting some plants and harvesting some food and maybe raising some birds and shit? No, it doesn't. So it's good to kind of, you know, you need to be aware of what's going on and protect yourself and protect your family, but at the same time, focus on the things that really matter and what you can control and what you can affect. Because bottom line is, we can't really control what they're doing with what they're doing. We just kind of have to see what they do now.
Yeah, totally. Whether we talk about it or protest against it or whatever awareness we're trying to promote or you know, get within ourselves or whatever, it's at the end of the day much of a difference. So you gotta try to, you know, grow your next meal like it could be your last, and put your best into it, and, you know, grow some flowers and create some butterflies in your backyard, or you know, go to the river, or whatever that is that brings you joy. It's very important to find that balance. And
yeah, and grow and create life.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like lately I've been going out and getting a mocha once a week, because I'm like, not because a mocha is good for me, just because it's like a little thing that I enjoy, and fuck it, I don't need to be perfect with my health by any means, and it gets me through it, you know, working 35 hours out of 70 or whatever it is at that point in time. So
yeah, you get to have a little interaction, tip somebody nice, make somebody smile, make their day a little bit, you know.
Exactly.
It's an ecosystem.
Exactly. And you know, whether, you know, everybody needs help, everybody needs to be supported, and you know, it's, you know, like lately when I go out and support a place, I'm like, I try to support them because they need it, not because they're like the most popular game in town. I'm like, whatever, maybe I won't go get the organic coffee or whatever, because I like those people that work there, and they're super kind, and, you know, they seem like they could use the help, and they're trying to do a good thing. And, you know, the reality of the world is not everybody can afford to eat organic, you know, and I'm blessed that most of the time I get, you know, given a lot of organic food. But yeah, it's whatever that balance is for you, find it, enjoy it, relish it. You know, whether it's 10% of your life you get to enjoy, or whether it's 5 minutes of your week you get to enjoy, or whether it's a majority of your life you're living good. Like, you know, find the balance, and you know, don't get caught up in all the bullshit. You know, like, we definitely like to talk about it, we like to be aware of it, and we like to open the conversation, and, you know, but at the end of the day, if civil war was to happen tomorrow, I'm going to regret certain parts of how I spent the last week the most, you know?
Right. Totally.
Well, on that note, you want to close it out?
Yeah, I think we had a pretty good talk today, bro. It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
Pretty nice with some sunshine. Got a nice, more lit background. I'm not wearing my blue light canceling glasses.
Yeah, exactly. I need to get some of those. Those are cool. How's
Bro,
the fucking cannabis game going? We haven't talked about that at all.
it's going pretty good. Just cleaning shit, you know, kind of at a lull, planning some reversals and stuff like that, and kind of focusing on some just flower production and stuff like that. Kind of watching the way things are unfolding in that scene as far as the country goes and things like that. It seems to be a closing window as far as sharing genetics and all that kind of thing. You know, it's going to get closer, and it's going to get more and more important to have certain things, I think, especially if we face this like Schedule 3 thing that the feds have been talking about, which, you know, for me, I really don't care. I'd like to see cannabis getting tightened up a little bit, get some of these Chads and Brads out of the game, all these people that didn't want to play back when you could actually catch minimum mandatory sentences and shit. You know, I'm not pro people that need the medicine and stuff getting in trouble though. So it's, you know, it's kind of a shit topic to talk about sometimes. But bottom line is, when weed was more illegal, it sure was a lot better.
I really wonder, looking back, I'm like, if it was all legal like this, it is nowadays, would I even have gotten involved? Would I even wanted it when I was like 15 to move to Cali and grow weed? I don't think I would have. I think I would have played college basketball and been a fucking frat boy now, honestly. I really do. Looking back, I'm just like, you know, like the allure for me was being kind of rebellious, you know, that was really the allure. Like I feel bad for kids nowadays that they don't have that feeling, you know, they don't have that like, you know, you were kind of a rock star. Like you went to the party and you had the chronic and nobody else had it. And like, you were kind of, they were like, whoa, how'd you create this? How'd you do this? And it's like, you just don't have, everybody's doing it now. And it's, you know, I went into a dispensary this past weekend and there's one right behind me at one of the markets I do. And my friend's getting ready to leave that market. So I bought her a joint. I wanted to go in there because she was going to buy something. I was like, well, let me steer you the right way. And I wound up buying some OZ Kush. And but I was just couldn't believe how cheap it was for like 5 half-gram joints in this little pack. It was like $17 with taxes, which taxes are crazy in California. So that means a grower is getting like $7 for this, $5
maybe,
or like, you know, which the weed is worth it, but the packaging and the time to roll it and like all of that, that's where I was like, dude, the fucking growers getting killed right here. I feel bad.
yeah.
But yeah, it was cool. And but I did try your chocolate Thai Afghani, and man, I'm a big fan. That one, of all the stuff I've tried, which isn't much since I smoked again, that one definitely gives me the best head change of anything.
That's dope.
Really makes me step outside myself and look within in a way I really enjoy.
That's awesome. You got a shit ton of those seeds, bro. They're old, but I got a ton of them.
Yeah, those are good. You got some winners in there for sure.
Thanks,
you guys
man.
Should buy those seeds. I'm a picky fuck, trust me.
Yeah, he is.
All right. Well, this was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Let's stay on it, and look forward to seeing the comments once we release this.
Yeah, sounds great. I can't wait to see some comments too. And so yeah, like Jeff said, definitely leave your comments, bring sources and facts and citations, and, you know, keep it civil, and we can really learn from each other. So it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to next time. I think we got a lot of good topics that we can keep touching on. So
yeah,
it's been a blast.
Awesome. Well, you'll be back at it here next week.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Peace.
All right. Peace.